It was a crisp autumn evening when a cat, lost and alone, wandered into a neighborhood where no one expected it to be. This wasn't just any stray cat. This little creature, with its sleek black fur and piercing amber eyes, unknowingly held the key to a bond that would change the lives of two families forever. Families who, up until that moment, had never even heard of each other. The cat had no name, no place to call home, and no family to search for it. But somewhere in its quiet, wandering path through the streets, something miraculous was about to unfold. This wasn't just a story about an animal finding its way home. This was the beginning of something that would connect people from two very different worlds, across streets, cultures, and backgrounds. Let's rewind a bit. The first family was the Martins. They lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood. Their life was full of routine, school runs, work, family dinners, and weekends at the park. They had everything one could need: a warm home, a beautiful garden, and a quiet street where kids played and neighbors waved at each other. But despite this picture-perfect existence, the Martins were going through a tough time. They had recently moved to the area, and it was harder than they had imagined to truly fit in. They were away from the chaos of the city, but also away from everything they had ever known. It was a sense of disconnection that weighed heavily on their hearts, especially for Emily, the young daughter who had found it difficult to make new friends. That night, when Emily stepped outside to play, it wasn't her usual carefree spirit that greeted the evening. It was a quiet loneliness that echoed in the way she looked at the world around her. That's when the cat appeared. Then on the other side of town, in a much more hectic and densely populated area, was the second family, the Rodriguezes. Their life was anything but quiet. They lived in the heart of the city, where the noise of car horns, street vendors, and the constant hum of people never seemed to stop. It was a fast-paced life, often overwhelming, but one that had its own charm. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez had spent years working long hours, juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. They were strong, resilient, and had built their life in a neighborhood that felt both alive and unforgiving. Yet there was an ache in their lives that neither could quite name. Maria had always dreamed of a slower, simpler life, away from the grind, but her dreams seemed out of reach. Until one fateful day, that cat entered their lives too. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a lost pet in need of a home. But sometimes fate works in strange ways. The cat that seemed to have no owner had somehow become the thread that would pull these two families from opposite sides of the city into each other's lives. It all started when the cat, in its wanderings, ended up in the Martins' yard. Emily was the first to spot it, crouching near the garden, its fur blending with the shadows. At first, she thought it was just a figment of her imagination, a fleeting shadow in the fading light. But when it meowed, loud and clear, something in Emily's heart shifted. She knelt down, calling it over with a soft voice, her eyes wide with curiosity. The cat hesitated, but then, sensing her kindness, it took a few cautious steps toward her. There was an instant connection, almost as if the animal understood her loneliness. Emily's parents, who had been searching for a way to help their daughter feel at home, saw this as a sign. They decided to take the cat in. It was a simple act, but it felt like something bigger. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Just a few days later, the Rodriguezes received a call that would shake them to their core. Their beloved cat, Luna, who had been missing for over a week, was spotted at the Martins' house. Luna had never strayed too far before. The Rodriguezes were frantic. They had tried everything, posted flyers, asked neighbors, scoured the streets, but Luna was nowhere to be found. Maria couldn't help but feel a sinking sensation in her stomach when she heard the news. What if Luna had been taken by someone else? What if the cat had found a new family and forgotten about them? But there was a twist. Emily had no idea Luna wasn't the cat's original name. To her, the cat was simply Shadow, and she had already started to bond with it, playing with it every day after school. The connection was undeniable, and the cat had settled into the Martins' home as if it had always belonged there. To Emily, Shadow was more than a pet. It was the friend she had been searching for, and so began the delicate tug-of-war between the families. Emily's parents had grown attached to the cat, too, but they knew it wasn't theirs to keep. The Rodriguezes were devastated and desperate to bring Luna back, but they also saw the bond that had formed between the cat and Emily. They weren't sure how to approach the situation, unsure if it was better to let go or fight for their pet. Could they really take Luna away from Emily, who had finally found something to hold on to in a world that felt so distant? The tension hung in the air. It wasn't just a battle over a cat anymore. It was about the connections we form, the way lives intersect in ways we can't always explain. The Rodriguezes were faced with the pain of potentially losing a family member, while the Martins grappled with the fear of losing the one thing that had brought light back into their daughter's life. They were worlds apart, but now they were united by one little creature who had no idea what it had started. So what happens next? Will the two families find a way to share their bond, or will the cat be the final thread that unravels everything they've built? Stay tuned as the story unfolds in the next part. The days that followed were filled with a mix of hope, uncertainty, and growing tension. Both families were now caught in an emotional struggle they hadn't anticipated. For the Martins, the cat had become more than just a pet. Emily, who had always felt like an outsider in her new home, had finally found something to hold on to. Shadow, now her beloved friend, had been the anchor that kept her grounded, a source of comfort she hadn't even realized she needed. As she played with the cat, her laugh echoed through the house, filling the once quiet corners with warmth. For her parents, it was almost as if Emily had come alive again. She was no longer the shy girl who sat in silence at dinner or spent her evenings staring out the window. With the cat, she found a sense of belonging, a feeling that had been missing since they moved. But then came the call from Maria Rodriguez. Maria had been crying when she spoke to Emily's mother. I don't know how to say this, but that cat, the one you found, it's ours. Her name is Luna. She's been missing for over a week now. There was a long pause, and then Emily's mom, Sarah, softly replied, "We didn't know. We thought she was just a stray." The words felt hollow in her mouth. How could they have known? The cat didn't have a collar, didn't seem to belong to anyone. It was a simple mistake, but in that moment, it felt like the weight of the world had settled onto Sarah's shoulders. She had hoped that, by keeping the cat, they had given Emily something real to hold on to. Now everything was suddenly up in the air. Maria, on the other hand, couldn't stop imagining the pain of losing Luna. For years, she had promised herself she'd never let her cat go. Luna wasn't just a pet, she was family. Maria and Carlos had rescued her from the shelter when she was a kitten, and the bond they shared was irreplaceable. When they had noticed Luna was missing, they had turned their world upside down looking for her, but she had disappeared without a trace. To suddenly hear that she was so close, just a few streets away, felt like a bittersweet miracle. But Maria was torn. Luna was Emily's lifeline, and taking her away would break the little girl's heart. The thought of that made Maria feel like she was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. For Carlos, the situation was simpler. His thoughts were consumed with the fact that Luna was lost, and he needed to bring her back. He didn't understand why the Martins didn't just return her. Why was this even a question? It wasn't their cat, and Emily's attachment didn't change that. They hadn't been looking for her, and they didn't know how much it would hurt to have her taken away. Yet deep down, even he could feel the sadness of it all. He could sense the struggle that Maria was going through, torn between doing what was right and protecting Emily's happiness. The night after that phone call, Emily lay in bed, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She missed Luna. No, Shadow already. It didn't seem fair. How could something so small, so simple, have made her feel whole again? And now it was slipping through her fingers. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. She wanted to run after the cat, to beg Maria and Carlos to let her keep her, to fight for the one thing that had filled the emptiness she had carried for so long. But she knew it wasn't that easy. Shadow, or Luna, whatever her name was, had a life before her. She had a family who missed her, who loved her, and who were desperate to bring her back. The next day, the Martins sat down to talk. Sarah and her husband, Greg, understood the gravity of the situation, but neither of them knew how to move forward. Should they give Luna back to the Rodriguezes? Should they let their daughter's heart break for the sake of doing what was right? Or should they fight for her? There was a silent tension in their house that day, and the quiet buzz of the clock on the wall seemed louder than ever before. But what really made the decision difficult was the knowledge that Emily had already started to say goodbye to her old life. She had started to believe that she was finally fitting in. Shadow had made her feel important, seen. Losing her now felt like losing a part of herself. Emily's voice trembled when she spoke up. "I don't want to lose her, Mom. She's my friend." Her words hit Sarah harder than anything. How could she take that away from her? The emotional pull was unbearable. In a final attempt to avoid more heartbreak, Sarah suggested they meet the Rodriguezes face to face. She felt that talking things through might help make the decision clearer. The tension between them had reached a boiling point, and they needed to hear each other's side of the story. Perhaps, just maybe, there was a way to make this work, to find a solution that wouldn't tear them apart. And so the two families arranged to meet the next Saturday afternoon. As the day approached, both families prepared themselves for the difficult conversation. Maria and Carlos were nervous, unsure of how the Martins would respond. What if they refused to give up the cat? What if it all turned into a messy argument? Meanwhile, the Martins felt the same dread, knowing that the decision to part with Luna would tear Emily apart, but that it was the right thing to do. The sun was beginning to set on that Saturday as both families stood across from each other in the Martins' backyard. The cat, Luna, sat between them, oblivious to the heaviness in the air. Emily's fingers were trembling as she reached down to pet the cat one last time. There was an uncomfortable silence as everyone waited for someone to speak first. The moment felt like it could last forever. Sarah and Maria exchanged looks, both women filled with the same uncertainty and fear. What would happen now? Would they find a way to resolve this, or would this small cat be the reason that two families would never see eye to eye again? And just as they were about to speak, something unexpected happened. Luna, or Shadow, leaped out of Emily's arms and ran towards Carlos. The two families froze. What did this mean? Had the cat already made her choice? As Luna, the cat that had brought so much tension and uncertainty into the lives of the Martins and the Rodriguezes, bounded towards Carlos, everything seemed to freeze. The cat paused in front of him, as if waiting for something. Emily's heart sank, her eyes wide with shock. Had the cat chosen them? Was it saying goodbye? Carlos knelt down, his hand instinctively reaching for Luna, who had always been his companion. He looked up at Maria, who was standing beside him, unsure of how to react. The family had been through so much, but in that moment, it felt as if Luna had made a choice for them. She was here with them again. But what did that mean for Emily? What would happen to the bond they had formed in just a few short days? Emily's face was pale, her lips trembling as she took a step back. "Please, can she stay?" Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. The weight of the moment pressed down on Sarah and Greg. They could see the pain in their daughter's eyes, the devastation of losing a friend she had already grown so attached to. Yet they could also see the genuine love that Maria and Carlos had for Luna. The same love that Emily had felt in her heart, now so torn between two families. For a moment, everything felt impossible. The world seemed to close in on them, leaving only the cat, the families, and a decision that had to be made. It was an impossible choice, one that no one could make lightly. But then something surprising happened. Maria, her eyes glistening with tears, spoke up. "I can see how much she means to Emily," Maria said softly, her voice carrying a weight of understanding. "I can't take her away from her. Luna is part of our family, but maybe it's time for her to be part of yours too." Carlos stood still, his emotions swirling in his chest. He didn't want to let go of Luna, but he knew deep down that there was something more important at play. The connection between Emily and Luna was undeniable. It was more than just a pet. It was a lifeline for a young girl who had been struggling to find her place in the world. And in a way, Luna had been a bridge, a link between two families who had more in common than they realized. Carlos took a deep breath and looked at Emily, who had tears silently streaming down her face. "Maybe this was meant to be," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Maybe Luna has a bigger purpose than we know." The relief that washed over Sarah and Greg was palpable. They could hardly believe what they were hearing, but in their hearts, they knew it was the right thing to do. Emily had found something in Luna that she couldn't easily replace. But it wasn't just about the cat. It was about the connections that had formed between these two families, connections they had never expected. For the Rodriguezes, the choice was one of selflessness. They loved Luna with all their hearts, but they understood that sometimes love means letting go for the greater good. And as they stood there in that quiet backyard, they realized that family wasn't defined by who you shared your blood with. It was about the bonds you built with those around you, regardless of where you came from. The decision to let Luna stay with the Martins wasn't easy, but it was a choice rooted in love and compassion. It wasn't just a cat that had brought these families together. It was their willingness to see beyond differences, to put aside their own pain, and to make room for something bigger than themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the families stood together, a little closer than they had been before. There were no more hard feelings, no more awkward silences. The bond that had formed between them was stronger than ever. They knew that, no matter where life took them, they would always be connected by the little cat who had reunited two families from opposite worlds. As they parted ways that evening, it was clear that the story wasn't over. Luna, now firmly part of the Martins family, had more to give. She had brought them together, yes, but she had also opened their hearts to the possibility of new beginnings. The Rodriguezes, though they had to say goodbye, had gained something too, a sense of peace, knowing that their beloved pet would continue to live a life full of love and care. And for Emily, the cat would always be a reminder that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The story of the lost cat had ended, but the journey of these two families had only just begun. And as they moved forward, they would carry with them the powerful lesson that love, no matter where it comes from, has the power to heal, to unite, and to change lives forever.